The first question, and I'm going to go ahead and draw the name out here first. Ken Boyd gets the honors. Would you support a bill, and some of these I may have to paraphrase to a degree. Would you support a bill that would end the practice of adding or tacking legislation on to popular bills to pass pork barrel items or other unpopular items? In essence, your thoughts on rider legislation that is not germane, I guess, to the original piece.
Well, absolutely I would support. You know, in local government, we have one bill, one issue to deal with, and we don't ever have things that are tacked on to get votes from people who are not going to go through the voting process. I think is what you're referring to, is more commonly referred to as earmarks, and I'm totally opposed to that. Now, that doesn't mean that if we have a transportation bill, that I wouldn't fight to get the piece of that transportation bill here in the 5th District. That's not an earmark. An earmark is when you have a transportation bill and somebody says, well, if you put a little something in there for Acorn, then we'll get some more votes for it. Now, that's what I'm totally opposed to, is being able to buy people's votes. And where have we seen this any more than what's going on with the health care bill right now? I mean, absolutely, it's just unbelievable what's going on in Congress right now and how they're utilizing this process of tacking on a little something to get them to buy a vote. That's exactly what they're doing, is buying a vote. And I'm totally opposed to that. I would not support anything, and I would definitely support legislation to do away with that.
If you are not the 5th District Republican congressional nominee, will you support the party's nominee from the primary, or will you run as a third-party candidate or support a third-party candidate?
Well, first of all, I would definitely support whoever the winner of this primary is. I think that should be me. I think I'm the right person to do that. But I think it's also very important, and I'm going to echo a lot of what Senator Hurt just said. The real thing that we have to do is we have to replace Tom Perriello. And if we split up our forces by separating the party out after separating with a third-party candidate at the end of this primary process, that would be the wrong thing to do. And I think what we would do is we would probably send Perriello back. I mean, that would be my fear. So I definitely will support whoever the candidate is that comes out of here. I would not run as an independent. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just really scared about what's going on in this country right now. I see what's happening in Washington this weekend, what they're going to do with health care. Another part of the country that are taking over the financial services industry. Everybody knows that embedded in this health care plans is taking over the student loan process in this country. This is incrementalism. That gradually the progressives are going to change this country, and Barack Obama will stand up there and tell you every day that we're going to fundamentally change this country to be in his image. I'm not sure what that image is, but it's not something that I want to be in. We have got to win this race in November, and we need to go forward. Whoever comes out of this process is the right candidate. Thank you.
If you go as a freshman or a freshwoman congresswoman, next January 1st, and this health care bill in its current form is law, what will you try to do about it? And
well, I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what Lawrence said, because I think the first thing we need to do, let's not even wait for this election to come up. Let's get behind Ken Cuccinelli and get this thing thrown out in the courts, because I think what they're doing is very But if Ken is not successful, there's another Ken who wants to go to Washington. And I want to go up there, and the way to attack this first thing is to defund it. You know, this is an interesting plan, because what it does is they're going to tax you for 4 years before any of it goes into place. And that's the only way that they can get it out of the Congressional Budget Office, so that it even looks like this is some sort of a tax neutral type thing. We all know it's not. We know it's $1 trillion in additional debt that's going to be put on this country. And I can tell you, we can't stand that $1 trillion. We absolutely cannot do anything more to our children and our grandchildren. Part of the reason I'm in this is because of my 4 children and my 2 grandchildren. Because I think if we don't do something very quickly to stop the direction this country's going in, it'll be unlike what any of us have known. And I heard a saying, and I can't remember who to attribute this to one time, but I don't want to be the person who has his grandson turn back to me and say, do you remember a time when we were free in this country? And I think that's where we're headed. Thank you.
When I or a young person applies for employment, we are required to pass a drug test. should a recipient of government assistance also be required to pass a drug test as a prerequisite for receiving such assistance?
I think you're going to hear a lot of the same answer on this particular question, because of course we believe that we're all equal under the law, and I don't think there should be some people that have to do certain things and other people that don't have to do certain things. And I believe we should drug test people who are on public assistance, and I certainly would support legislation to that effect.
Where do you draw the line in terms of going with the majority of your constituents and fitting in, to quote the question, in Congress, being a congressperson? How important is it to always represent the majority of your constituents?
As I mentioned to you before, I'm on the front lines of the political stream every month. And I just came back from a meeting on our budget hearing where we had over 800 people that came out, and some 150 of those spoke to us about how we should raise their taxes. Now, that's a core principle of mine. I don't think that in a recession we should at all raise the taxes on the individuals out there. Now, I also got an awful lot of emails from a lot of people. So sometimes when you're in that position, it's not easy to tell exactly where the majority of your constituents are. And you have to pay close attention to what people are saying. But in the long run, what I do is I fall back on my values and principles, which are for limited government, cut spending in government, to individual responsibility. And as long as it's going to go against one of those principles, no matter how many people, because that's what I ran on. When I ran, I told the people the selection of the majority was made by the fact that I won that election. And I won on those principles. So I could not turn around just because I had a lot of people come out and sit in front of me and they were opposing my principles that I promised the public and promised the electorate that I was going to follow would go against it. So yes, I think that it's difficult to do, but you always have to follow your core principles in which you elected on. We're in troubled times in Washington, D.C., and everybody knows that one of the first things that we've got to tackle is this budget, this out-of-control budget. Because if you really think about it, everything goes back to show me the money, to steal from a line from a famous movie. My background is in finance. I spent 40 years in the finance business. And I can tell you, I understand how to read a balance sheet, and I understand how to know when we've got money to spend and when we don't have money to spend. In our county, for the first time this year, we've cut actually over the last 2 years, over $200 million out of our capital improvement plan. And believe me, the liberals in our group wanted to spend that money. But I could look at the balance sheet and simply say, listen, this is not sustainable. We cannot pay the debt on this. Sure, we could borrow the money, we could get the money and borrow it, but we had no way to pay the debt back. So we didn't. We didn't do that spending. Now, if we had some people in Washington that actually looked at their balance sheets and looked at their income and expense statements and understood that you can't just keep borrowing money from the Chinese and from the Russians and everybody else. You can't just keep printing money, as the Federal Reserve does, and expect for that ever to be sustainable. Now, this is what I think that I can bring to Washington, D.C., and why I think I'm the right person to be the next congressman from this area. We have absolutely got to turn back people like Tom Perriello, who doesn't understand, obviously, how to balance a balance sheet. He obviously spent his time up in New York working for George Soros organizations, has never really understood what it's really like to have to live on a budget and to live within their means. That's why I asked for your vote in June, and then also your vote in November, because it's time to take this country back. Thank you very much for being here today.